Good morning. It's interesting, isn't it, the questions that the census gets us to think about. I read an article just this last week in which a journalist in The Guardian described a sense of sadness and loss as they ticked the no faith box on the census, and they described their partner feeling the same. It was as though they wanted something even though they couldn't bring themselves to own that they actually believed it. We often talk about living in a post-Christian Britain, and it's very interesting if you look at the statistics. So, for instance, in any given month, about 10% of British adults, that is, will go to church, read the Bible at least once, and pray. Only 10%, and yet those same statistics found that 43% of British people believe that Jesus rose from the dead. What that points to is that perhaps we want to sit on the fence. We think probably Jesus did rise from the dead. Actually, if you look at the evidence, it's pretty hard to find any evidence any other way other than that he did. Many people have looked into that scientifically, forensically, and come to the conclusion that he did. But we want to sit on the fence about what it means for us. And that's why we have the story of Thomas today, recorded in the Gospel of John. You see, he still hangs around with the disciples. He hasn't cut and run. He still sees something in what they have and what they do that appeals to him. But he isn't living it himself because he isn't quite sure if he can trust it. And Jesus' word to him is, stop doubting and believe. He doesn't want to take that step of trust, but actually Thomas finds out, and we all find out in life, that life requires trust. And in fact, we all take big steps of trust every day. The really big ones are things like moving job, moving house. Both of those situations, you don't know what the future's going to be like, but you take a decision based on what you have heard and what you think, and then you find out if you're right or not. And hopefully you are. When it comes to marriage, it's even more so. You make vows like for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, and you have no idea whether you're going to be healthy until you're 85 or whether you'll end up caring for a terminal patient in 5 years' time. And yet we take these steps of trust because it's an essential part of life. Jesus' word to us about the resurrection is, stop doubting and believe. One of the most common things I hear when I talk about faith with people is there's a yearning in people and that comes out in words like, I wish I had your faith. I would love to have a faith. That must be wonderful for you. But that's a little bit like having a car on your drive and saying, oh, I wish I could drive like you. Faith is not a feeling that rises up inside us, but it's a choice to do something about what we think might possibly be true. When you drive that car that's sitting on your driveway, you don't know for a fact that it's not going to blow up 2 meters down the road. You don't know that it's not going to break down or that you won't be involved in a hideous accident. But you take it on trust that the last MOT was good and that the people who sold you the car are trustworthy and that thousands and thousands of other people are driving that car and they don't seem to have problems. And so you give it a go. You put your faith in the car and you drive it. When people say, I wish I had your faith, what I try to communicate is, you can do. It's not a feeling that rises up, it's a choice. When you see that it's plausible that Jesus rose from the dead, and 43% of British people, even without necessarily having studied it, seem to think so. If that's plausible, you have a choice about what you do about it. Maybe what we lack is knowing what that next step might be. If it's true, all of this Christianity, what do I do about it? I want to make an invitation that if you'd like to explore that more, we're going to be running something called an Alpha course at WCC in the next couple of months. It's going to be starting, we hope. That will obviously depend on lockdown restrictions lifting on schedule. And we'd love you to come along, and it's a very informal setting in which you can look at what does the Christian message say about our lives? How does it impact us? If you'd like to know more about that, just put something in the YouTube chat or in the comments below. Or do go to our website and look under Alpha there. I want to give you one example, though, of how the resurrection life of Jesus changes our lives, the impact it has and why it still matters today. And it comes in the other story we read earlier, the story of Mary at the tomb. If you're not familiar with the whole story of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection, Mary was one of a very small number of people who stuck with Jesus throughout. She was there when he was being crucified, when many of his other disciples had left. She was still there watching. She was the first to the tomb that day that Jesus rose from the dead, because she wanted to be there to prepare his body according to the Jewish rituals. She was one of his most faithful followers, and he had done so much for her as well. You can read about that in the rest of the Gospels. And so you can imagine the deep suffering and pain and loss that she must have experienced as she saw him being mistreated and finally crucified. When she meets him on that amazing Resurrection Sunday, she hears her name called, Mary, and she knows his voice straight away, and this cry comes out of her, Rabboni, which means teacher. And she turns and she looks at him and she recognizes him, and she must be clinging to him because he says to her, don't cling to me. Don't hold on to me. I haven't yet ascended to my Father. So you can see this heart reaction in her. Now, in that moment, was all of that pain that she had gone through, was all of that heartache, was it negated? Well, no, it wasn't. It was still real, and she'd still been through it, but it was eclipsed by a joy that was far greater. If you've wondered, as you have thought about Christian friends and family who you know, why it is that there's a deep-seated joy and a resilience in people who have faith in Jesus Christ, it's this. Jesus knows what it's like to suffer. He doesn't say, suffering doesn't matter, forget it all, pretend it didn't happen. But he does offer a joy that is so deep that it eclipses suffering. This is why for thousands and thousands of years, whether it's been easy to be a Christian or really, really difficult, as it has been at some points in history and under some regimes, and still is around the world in many places today, Christians still rejoice, even if it brings them suffering, to say, Jesus is my Lord, and I'll follow him with my life. So I want to say to you today, in Jesus' words, stop doubting and believe. If you're in this service this morning and you don't already have a faith in Jesus Christ, it's probably because there's some interest in you. You followed through the pilgrimage on Good Friday perhaps, or a friend invited you and you thought, yes, that would be good on Easter Sunday. There's a next step that says, if this might be true, what am I going to do about it? And I want to hold out ahead of that just this hope that so many of us have found, and which you too can find, that Jesus offers a deep joy that eclipses suffering. Whatever you've been through in the last year, and it has been so tough for so many, Jesus offers a joy that eclipses even that. Stop doubting and believe.